At Google I/O, the company announced that AI will be integrated with almost every major product. The company is also investing a ton of energy to improve its new Bard chatbot. And the company released a new tablet, a brand new Pixel phone, and its best in class and first foldable phone with a pretty hefty price tag. For ZDNet, I'm Dan Patterson with a panel of experts, including editor-in-chief Jason Heiner, Sabrina Ortiz, and Carrie Wong. So this was Google's flagship major annual event, but it kind of felt like, Jason, one of their biggest announcements in years and a reaction to ChatGPT, to generative AI. So what is your top takeaway, your big headline from Google I/O this year?
Yeah, it really is. Can they compete with ChatGPT? ChatGPT and really generative AI broadly has surprised the world in the past 6 months, has brought us these new innovations and capabilities that we didn't realize we were on the cusp of, being able to talk to a chatbot and get so much useful information. And that has siphoned some traffic and interest and usefulness out of Google for the first time really in 2 decades. And now Google is got caught a little bit flat-footed and is trying to react. And they reacted in a big way at Google I/O. Really, the whole event from beginning to end was about AI. They started with AI. That when they talked about hardware, they were still talking about AI. And when they got to the end, talking about the future, it was all, how AI is changing the world. And so they have this classic innovator's dilemma, though. Their whole business model, they really have a one-legged economy in their business model, which is all based on search and ads in search. And if you switch from this list of items where people can buy access to getting into that list, which is where they make all of their money, to a chatbot where you sort of start with a question and then you further refine that question. And it's really this a little bit more conversational, why we call it conversational AI. It makes that list of links that Google makes all of its money on a little bit obsolete. And so my question is, they talked a lot about it, and we'll talk about how effective Bard, their version of ChatGPT, their competitor, is. Sabrina's written a lot about that and has a lot of good reflections on it. But even if they could compete, will they disrupt themselves? That's a big question for me.
Yeah, Sabrina, Jason brings up this great point of the innovator's dilemma, this kind of trap Google might be in right now. They've faced competition and have been reactionary in the past, maybe social and Google Plus is an analog, but that was almost a decade ago. And this almost feels like a more significant threat to Google's core business. You have written a ton about Bard and other chatbots. So tell me, how does this feel, or how does the Google announcement and these updates to Bard feel relative to the rest of the space?
So there's no doubt that with Palm 2 and switching over to Palm 2, it was Google's way of saying, hey, we're in the space and we're ready to compete. Unfortunately, it fell short as Google Bard's initial launch fell short. And I think that you could tell that Google is trying really hard to try and stay relevant and try to compete and try to gain some more autonomy and authority in the space, but they're just really struggling and falling behind. And I think this Palm 2 approach was also a rushed approach, which is what we saw with the Google Bard initial launch.
Carrie, I love what you said, that they struck this kind of nice balance between hardware and software. And they did announce this very accessible new Pixel. It's not a best-in-class phone, but it's a really good phone and their first foldable phone. So I guess let's start with the foldable phone. Do we care? Does this kind of set a standard that others should, like a model others should follow? Where is this new foldable phone in the kind of grand scheme of all things Pixel or mobile?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's always good to see competition. So for the longest time, I'd say maybe over the past 3 to 4 years, the foldable phone market, at least within the US, has been dominated by Samsung. The flip phones, the foldable phones. If you see any commercials outside about foldables, it's likely a device from Samsung. And so I think this release from Google is significant in really two ways. The first one is that, one, it brings competition. It pushes Samsung to sort of think outside of what it's always been doing with foldables. Perhaps they might want to test a different aspect ratio. Perhaps they want to test new use cases. And the second thing is that this is really Google's way of saying that they're sort of committed to this large screen form factor. And they're sort of promising this with both the foldable and the tablets. They're thinking of new ways for people to use these large screens beyond just them being larger sizes of what you're already doing on your smartphone. So with the foldable, Google is really pitching two specific use cases and features. The first one is called dual screen interpreter mode, which if you guys remember the translation glasses from last year's I/O, Google sort of teased that towards the end of the event. It was just a concept, but just like every other concept, the company just never talks about it afterward. And so I thought about that when Google sort of presented on that dual screen interpreter mode, because it's basically the same thing where you hold the phone up and as you're talking to someone who's speaking a different language, it'll translate everything in real time and you'll be able to see what they're talking about. They'll be able to see what you're talking about. And I think that sort of conversational aspect is something that Google is able to leverage with the Pixel Fold. The second feature is basically that sort of hinge mechanism. So they're basically pitching astrophotography or nightography with that sort of form factor where you could basically set your phone down sort of like a tripod and you'll be able to take this sort of long exposure shot of the night sky or anything that's sort of moving really quick, I guess, these long exposure shots. And so whether Google sort of succeeds with enticing users to this sort of product is, we'll give it time. We'll give it a couple of months to see how that works out. The foldable itself costs $1,799, $1,799, which is expensive. No one's going to fork out that money unless they're an enthusiast. But if they could sort of pitch these practical ideas to average consumers, popular consumers, my parents, my family, whoever, then sure, like they'll be able to make a big move with the foldable. But until then, I sort of always see it as until Apple actually pushes out a foldable, something like this just won't go into the mainstream audience yet. And I think that's fine by Google's means.
What about the tablet? That almost seems like it is designed to do the opposite, to really hit the mainstream audience. It's affordable, $500, right?
Yeah, and if you really think about it, Google is also selling the tablet stand. So basically the idea of the tablet is that it is your run-of-the-mill Android tablet. You could use it for browsing, you could use it to play games, you could use it to watch YouTube videos, but it's also this dockable smart home hub. So they're selling it with this wireless charging speaker dock, which basically you could set it on your kitchen, you could set it on your countertop. And when you place the tablet on top of it, it basically turns it into this module where you could use it to control your smart home appliances and products throughout your house. And the sort of thinking behind this is that when we typically use a tablet, after we're done using it, we'll just set it aside. We'll put it on a drawer, we'll leave it on top of our table and sort of forget about it. And so the idea here is that we're making use of it even when we're not necessarily holding on to the tablet. And it's smart. And like you said, it's also affordable in a way because the actual charging dock costs $130, I believe. So if you really think about it, the tablet costs $370. And in that sense, I don't think the Google Pixel tablet is competing directly against Pro tablets like the iPad Pro or any other Samsung tablet that costs more than $500. But instead, Google, in a way, is almost paving its own road with this tablet. It's trying to redefine the way that we use tablets. And at that price, I think it's a lot more accessible than some of its competitors.
They have always made great tablets. This reminds me of that Pixel 7, which is now pretty old, but it was just the perfect consumer tablet. It wasn't pro, but it let me do a lot of stuff that it seems like this tablet will as well. Everyone, but especially Sabrina, because you follow AI and kind of products in AI, I have a ton of notes about how this was infused with everything, including the hardware. But what struck you, Sabrina, as the most important announcements in terms of products and the integration with AI into products?
Yeah, I think you could really tell that Google wants to streamline generative AI across all of their most popular apps, all of their workspace. I do think that what will be really helpful for people, and it's one of those generative AI features that doesn't feel like it's being implemented for generative AI's sake, which we did see a lot of at Google I/O, is the Help Me Write new feature in Gmail. Will auto reply, but it takes it to like the next level because it's not just a simple sentence that it's trying to suggest. It's a whole email that it could suggest, and it could use the context from your previous conversation thread. And that will actually, I think, be useful and be something that saves people time. So I think that probably is the most useful and actual purposeful and practical feature that they announce across their workspace.
I think too. So I just wanted to say, you mentioned, Sabrina, that there are some of the challenges that they have with sort of the quality of the AI. It will be interesting to see if they can overcome those and make that really good. Because if it's not good, right, then it becomes less helpful. We see that in some of these auto response options in other products today. You mentioned Palm 2, which is essentially Google's equivalent of GPT-4. When you think of ChatGPT, for those who really nerd out on this stuff, ChatGPT-4 has like been this big jump forward for ChatGPT, and Google's bet is that this Palm 2 is their big leap forward. But you've done some initial testing already, and you've not found that to be the case. Maybe you could share some of those examples.
Totally. I think the most jarring thing for me was logging on yesterday and getting ready to test Google Bard and see the hype of the new model and just asking just to see, like, is this on the new model? And I asked Bard, hey, what language model are you running on? And it told me Lambda. And I was like, wait, we did this whole big switch yesterday. This was one of the biggest announcements of the entire event. So I asked it and I'm like, so I thought you were running on Palm 2. And it was like, no, sorry, we're working on Palm 2, but I'm not running on it yet. And I don't know if it's just an example of hallucination or just, again, misinformation altogether. But that's a very telling sign that Palm 2 is just not as capable as they're trying to make it seem. Another highlight was me asking it what the 50 states are, which I think all of us here in this room could probably start singing the 50 states song and give you a better answer than Bard gave me, because Bard said, hey, I'm sorry, I'm only a language model and I can't give you that answer. So as far as I'm concerned, the same weaknesses, the same things that needed to be improved on remain, which is really strange because we moved from a lightweight version of Lambda, which we knew wouldn't be the most ideal model. And not only did we move to Palm, but we moved to Palm 2, which should have been a huge leap, but we're still seeing the same weaknesses.
Does this integration, Jason, you raised this great point about useful and quality. And I think that what you just mentioned is this real challenge with quality. If this is integrated through the rest of Google Apps, which I thought was the most interesting or useful example throughout the G Suite, how does this stack up compared to Microsoft? Like, can they compete, or is Microsoft's integration with ChatGPT, OpenAI just better?
I loved that so while we were watching this in the New York office this week, I remember at several points, Sabrina saying, Microsoft just announced this, last week, this feature, or just Microsoft literally had just said this. And so one of the things that we talked about was the fact that it's easy to make a slide and it's easy to do a demo. And in some of these cases, our confidence isn't necessarily there yet that Google has actually built these things or made them useful. But they're saying this is coming, right? We're gonna make a slide, we're gonna make a demo and say this is coming. That could be the case. Maybe they have already worked on it. Google has been working on these kinds of things for years. It's just they haven't proven to us or shown us something in the real world that has the same usefulness as the other things that are out there, especially based on GPT-4 from OpenAI. And so And Microsoft obviously has put a lot of cycles, a lot of resources into this, and has already produced some pretty, useful stuff. Bing Chat takes Chat GPT, GPT-4, and, then combines it with more recent information. And so it becomes more useful and more relevant. Google just still feels like they are really racing to catch up and are feeling the heat from this, and the fact that they spent so much time talking about these things and breaking it down it felt a little bit defensive, right? Just saying like, look, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. A lot of those things, as Sabrina reminded us, were things that Microsoft had already announced. And so there was a little bit of Me Too-ness to what they announced.
How do you think Google lost this lead, at least as recently as last year, and definitely going back maybe the last decade? There was kind of the sentiment in tech that Google, at least through their acquisitions and the talent that they had, was kind of the leader in artificial intelligence. And now, like you said, Jason, they're kind of defensive and playing catch up. How did they lose this lead? Or did they lose this lead? Maybe their tech is really good. They just have guardrails on it. Where is Google relative to the rest of their competition?
Yeah, I'll have one quick comment and then I'll toss it to Carrie and Sabrina. But it's interesting because it's not just Google. It's also going back about 5 or 6 years, someone who's on ZDNet team now, Alison Denisco-Rayom, she wrote a story about how all the narrative was around China was just crushing the US in AI, that they were going to be the next powerhouse when it came to technology, because even as much as 5, 6, 7 years ago, we could see that this was the next big leap, right? AI was going to be the next big leap. And China was, really out engineering the US in terms of graduating like 10 engineers that are focused on AI and machine learning on these things to everyone that the US was graduating. And it really looked like that was where the future, the nexus of the tech industry was going to move. And so it surprised everybody in Asia, in the US, in Europe, all over the world, that this small group of like 200 to 400 people working on this in Silicon Valley still came up and outflanked Google, outflanked Huawei, outflanked everyone to this, major breakthrough. And so I think we're still all kind of coming to grips with that and not really sure what it all means or how, but we know that it's funny that when it comes to when the computer really, right, the small group at Apple outflanked IBM. When it came to the phone, again, later, it was really a team of about 20 or 30 people that came up with the iPhone that really beat at the time Nokia and BlackBerry, which dominated, all of the phone industry. And throughout history, it's been kind of these small teams focused on one thing really narrowly that have delivered a lot of advances and breakthroughs. So it is really fascinating stuff. But certainly I would love sort of Sabrina to share her perspective, because she's looked so closely at what Microsoft has done and, the advances they've made and, how that compares with what Google's doing.
I think there's a very big difference when you're working on a big technological advancement like this on your own pace. And that is what Microsoft did. Microsoft worked on it because they wanted this product to be successful and they want to be in the space and do it well. Google, however, was playing catch up, and Google was racing and Google was rushing. And that's very different for Google. Google is the type of company to hold on to these big AI advancements for a while. Like, for example, they have this AI generator, Imagine, and they've photo generator, that is. Imagine, for a while they've been holding on to it, and it's yet to be released. I expected it to be released at Google I/O because that's how long they've been holding on to it, and it's still in demos you see, and it's proven to be efficient, but they still hold on to it because that's just at Google's DNA, is holding on to their things for a while until they're 100% positive it's going to be a success. But with Bard, we saw the complete opposite. They completely strayed from what they usually do. They rushed, there was panic, and then we got something that underperformed. So now they're just over-promising, under-delivering, and I think it's because of this rush and this race aspect. They're not being the trailblazers. They're being the ones who are chasing, and I think that shows a lot in their space in AI right now and how badly they're trailing behind.
Where does this put assistance? Or how does this frame assistance? And voice was a key interface for a few years, but it now seems like at every major company, including these layoffs recently at Amazon, assistants are taking a step back. Is that happening at Google too?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one sort of keyword that I was looking for during I/O was Google Assistant, and I don't think they talked much about it at all. But the sort of trajectory that we're looking at right now is this sort of integration of Bard within Android. I think that's just makes total sense for Google because that's the easiest way for them to sort of get the program and the service to everyone who already owns a device that has it, right? And so I think that ultimately raises this question as to how reliable is this AI technology, right? Because at the end of the day, people are going to look at their phones, they're going to search a question, they're going to get an answer for it, and they don't know if that's the one that they should be trusting or not. Because as we've sort of seen with AI in general, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's OpenAI or Google, sometimes the answers can be unreliable. And so even now, if you're testing Google Bard, you'll see those sort of notes at the beginning that this is an experimental product. And so whether Google wants to generalize it a bit more, whether they want to replace Google Assistant with it, I do think that they will need a lot more refinements before they can actually push it to people to take advantage of. So that's sort of my take.
Carrie, because of your expertise in hardware, I'm very curious your thoughts on, we haven't mentioned the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Was Apple watching this and then wiped some sweat off their forehead and said, phew, bullet dodged? Or did they watch this and go, our AI really stinks? Even in the best hardware, it's really bad. What was Apple, or what do you think Apple's posture was, their reaction was, and what can we expect to see from them at WWDC?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately Apple is a company that really thinks on its own. They sort of take their own roadmaps when it comes to creating products, especially newer ones. And so while I am 100% sure within the Apple dungeon, there is a team that is working on foldables, whether it's foldable phones or foldable tablets, foldable TVs, whatever. I don't think that they were sweating about creating a foldable competitor. And I mean, ultimately, if you look at where foldables are right now, even after 4 years, they're still not the most accessible piece of product. They're still priced very high. It's not a field that I think Apple has to force themselves into. And frankly, I think Apple has other things that they're sort of putting their eggs into, right? They're thinking more about this sort of mixed reality headsets. They're thinking more about software. And in fact, they're not even thinking much about AI. We haven't really heard much about how Apple is going to sort of put themselves into this industry where Microsoft and Google is sort of taking advantage of. So I think going into WWDC, Apple is just going to play their own game. They're going to talk about Mac OS. They're going to be talking about iPad OS, iOS, and all their sort of features that they've built up already, and not so much care about what others are doing.
Sabrina, what do you think? Is Siri about to see a huge improvement, or does Apple not care?
See, I think Apple is another company where they will sit it out, wait it out, and they will enter when they are 100% sure that they could deliver and add more value to the space. And we've seen this with everything, which is also kind of what Carrie was alluding with foldables. Like, they're going to sit back, they're going to watch, and once they see that everyone wants a foldable, they're going to jump in and do it better. And I think the same thing for AI. I think right now they're just going to wait it out and see where they really could add value. And when they find that perfect space where they could reach the most people and honestly even outperform the current players, then they'll jump in.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think that one of the things to not lose sight of is one of the problems that Google has partly is that in 2018, their head of AI and machine learning, John Giandrea, he left Google and went to Apple. And he's been working for all that time to sort of recreate the team and the products behind. And we really have heard very little about what they're working on. And so to Sabrina's point, like they're probably not sleeping on this one. There probably is someone in the dungeon of, you know, the spaceship somewhere. And it probably is John Giandrea and team that have been working on something, making Siri better. And I think that was a setback. I mean, these leaders are one person, but they are, you know, he was the one driving a lot of that forward at Google. And they haven't, my understanding is that they haven't really replaced that leadership in the same way. And that he's been over, you know, working on something quietly for now 5 years at Apple. And so it'll be really interesting. I don't know that I have a confidence that we're talking about, you know, OpenAI level stuff. But it will be interesting to see. I don't think Apple's completely asleep at the wheel, although it feels like it sometimes when you ask Siri things. But there's the possibility that Apple might be prepared for this, or better prepared than we might expect.
Yeah. So before I want to go around the horn and hear was this a win, lose, or a meh for Google? I just want to chime in with my only thought, not my only thought, but I think my biggest takeaway from I/O was the lack of communication about business tools. And I really thought, especially because Meta has really hyped their shift to AI and how they will use AI to help advertisers, generative AI to help create ads that are potentially more effective. I thought we would hear something about Google's ad product and generative AI, that this will really help you be more effective in search. And we heard little to nothing about that, which was really surprising. Okay, so Carrie, let's start with you. Was this a win for Google this year? Was it a loss, or was it somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a win for the most part. I think the goal of the actual conference was just to get the point that they're committed to AI. So one thing that I like to say is that with I/O this year, AI doesn't mean artificial intelligence. It means all in. And so you sort of see that across all of their services and products. And they also just put out 3 really good or promising hardware products in the Pixel 7a and the Pixel Fold and the Pixel tablet. So at least we have those products in hand over the next couple of months to sort of test. As for the software and services, we'll have to see how they sort of deliver them, or if they deliver them over the next couple of months in the year. But for the most part, I'd say it's a win for Google.
Sabrina, was it a win or a loss?
I will be somewhere in the middle. I would say it's a meh, as you put it before, simply because I'm really looking at their AI sphere, and this was really their opportunity to redeem themselves. And I was confident that they would, but I don't think that with this whole Palm 2 and the switch over and what we've seen, even the announcements they made for Workspace, nothing seems like a real big win, a real big, like, oh, great, they've reclaimed their spot at the top. It doesn't feel that way. It feels like they're still trailing behind. And it's not just trailing behind OpenAI and Microsoft. There's so many other companies who are now investing in AI chatbots and AI technology. And it seems like even they are doing better than Google. So for that reason, I'm going to give it a middle ranking, because I think that they could have been doing a little bit more to redeem their spot.
Jason.
I'm gonna call it a little bit of a loss and not a win, mostly because I think that for most of what they showed, they let everyone else define them instead of picking their own path to like what we want to do. It felt so reactive that and I think all of these things that they do, it may be a little bit of a loss for Google, but I think some of this is the environment that they're in. I think it could be a win for all of us, for Google to do some competitive things, to really work hard, to be all in on AI. I think that they will deliver eventually some really good incremental improvements to a lot of their products using this. They still have lots of smart people working on these things. They're just a little bit maybe scattershot or not necessarily have a cohesive vision for this. And their cohesive vision that they showed at this event, and he was like, don't worry, we're working on this stuff too. Whereas I think they could have given us a little bit of, here's our different vision for what the future, looks like, and how, we're going to do something, impactful that isn't just a reaction to what everyone else is doing. And so I think the future for Google is a little bit cloudy from that perspective, especially because of this innovators dilemma piece. They make so much of their business is based on those search ads and those links, that for them to change that and to undermine sort of what they do, it really makes it difficult for them to make very significant changes to that core and most important product that, has dominated so much of all of our lives for the last 2 decades. And so we'll see. They have a very tough thing to try to do. It's tough to be the best, and something comes along that really changes the game, and you have to try to do it too. It reminds me of when Netflix came along, and Blockbuster wanted to do an online service, and the shareholders wouldn't let the CEO do it because they said, if you do that, if you go to a service, 10% of our revenue, we will lose, because 10% of our revenue is from late fees. And so they didn't change their business because they would lose 10% of their revenue. So instead they lost all of their revenue. That's the innovator's dilemma. And Google has a little bit of that kind of challenge right now that they're facing down.
That is so thoughtful. And at the very least, it frames Google in this way that I think Sabrina and everyone, Carrie, you might have mentioned this as well. It puts Google in this position where they just have to react. So at the very least, we all get to win by watching them evolve in a way that is very unlike Google. Carrie wrote a great piece called "Every Hardware Product Google Just Announced" at I/O 2023. And yes, there is a foldable. Sabrina wrote an excellent article about all of the AI features announced at Google I/O this year. You can find those at zdnet.com. My name is Dan Patterson, and we will talk to you very soon.